Josh Benner. This is the Evangelism Training Podcast, Episode 1. And at the beginning, I thought it'd be helpful to give a brief description of the purpose of this podcast. Hopefully from the name, it's somewhat self-explanatory that it's to train people in evangelism. In each episode, we will have either an evangelist, a missionary, a writer, or a scholar, or a combination of those things, join us, and we will talk about various subjects related to evangelism and missions for the purpose of training Christians for sharing the good news of the gospel, doing the work of an evangelist, and fulfilling the Great Commission that Christ has given us. I'm so excited in this first episode to be joined by Dr. Sam Chan. Reading his biography, Sam Chan is a global citizen, born in Hong Kong, raised in Australia, a medical doctor in Sydney, PhD in the USA, that's from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. He connects with young, postmodern, post-reached, post-Christian audiences. Today we'll be talking about subjects related to evangelism and to his book, How to Talk About Jesus Without Being That Guy. Dr. Chan also speaks to high schoolers and professionals, seminary students, and academics. His topics are evangelism, ethics, preaching, storytelling, and apologetics. He also blogs at espressotheology.com. It's a great conversation with Dr. Chan. I hope you'll enjoy it. Dr. Chan, I want to sincerely thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate your latest book, and I know for me, I got a lot out of it. Just a lot of ideas and concepts for evangelism and sharing the gospel, because I'll be totally honest, evangelism is not my absolute greatest strength. I wish it was. It's something that to me is a skill that I have to develop, and I think that for a lot of people, that's probably the same way. And I think we would probably both agree that the relational nature of evangelism that you talk about so much in your book, that in itself is not new. I think it's always been, but maybe it's our ideas or our paradigm for evangelism that's maybe shifted today as we become more post-Christian versus where we were maybe 30 or 40 years ago or 50 years ago. I think a lot of us have this kind of Billy Graham, four spiritual laws idea of evangelism. And again, that might not always be the thing that is really what speaks to people as America and Australia become more and more secular.
Oh, totally. And like we've changed so much, and that's part of the dilemma of being a Christian. I think it's in our DNA of every Christian to want their friends and family to also become Christians. But at the same time, we're in a culture where it's very hard to even talk about religion or Jesus. So how do we talk about Jesus without becoming that guy, which is exactly what the book says. And as you say, our culture's changed so much over the last 10, 20, 30 years. 20 years ago, we were in Christendom. Suddenly, overnight, we're post-Christendom. 20 years ago, we were a very reached Christian culture. Suddenly, overnight, we feel very post-reached, unreached, post-Christian. And the way I explain it best in the book is I'm actually old enough. I was at that last Billy Graham crusade in Australia in the 1970s. So I saw it all. I saw Billy at his best. He gave the 20-minute Bible talk. Then he made the appeal. The choir gets up and sings Just As I Am. And Billy says, hey, if you pray the prayer, come down the front. And he says that famous Billy Graham line, the buses will wait. And what that means is the non-believer back then at a Billy Graham crusade came on a church bus. The non-believer back then was way more churched than we remember. So the non-believer back then had gone to Sunday school, they'd gone to a church holiday program as a kid, they were part of the church soccer team, and so when they've grown up and suddenly the church has a church bus going to Billy Graham crusade, they go with all their church friends to hear Billy Graham. So what's changed now is today, our non-believer friends are not church. They didn't go to Sunday school as a kid. They didn't go to some church holiday program. They're a non-church believer. So that's at least one major thing that's changed in post-Christendom.
And so from that, what do you think are some of the key changes then we need to make in our approach to reaching people who are don't have that background in church?
Yeah, so the book I give 8 or 9 tips, but the number one tip then is our non-believer friends have to somehow be part of a believing community again. And I say one of the big problems is, as Christians, we've kept 2 separate universes of friends. So we have a universe of Christian friends, and we have a universe of non-Christian friends. When our Christian friends have a barbecue, we go with them. When our non-Christian friends have a barbecue, we go to that barbecue. But the two universes stay separate. So what I say is, as long as they stay separate, our efforts at evangelism are always going to be very unbelievable. And in the book I say, just imagine a UFO lands in my backyard, and I try to tell you, a UFO landed in my backyard last night. You're not going to believe me. No matter how true it is, you're not going to believe me. And the evidence won't sway you either. Even if I can convince you to come, check out the UFO, you're going to see it, you're going to touch it, you go, nah. There's another explanation for this. This is a hoax. I don't believe you. But if 50 of this person's friends also say, oh, wow, me too, a UFO landed in my backyard last night, now the story's way more believable. It was always true, but it's more believable. And when we think evangelism, we think, oh, okay, I need to tell my friends about Jesus, and we go out solo, we go out bravely, and whatever we say is true. Jesus rose from the dead, whether you like it or not. It's going to be unbelievable, because we're going to be the one and only bozo in that friend's life who believes in the Jesus story. But if suddenly our friend has 50 other bozos, 50 other Christians also believe this story, they're going to think, hey, this is way more believable because 50 of my friends also believe this story. So one tip in my book is I say, well, why don't we merge our universes of friends, like deliberately, proactively, as a lifestyle change, merge our universes. So when our Christian friends have a barbecue, we invite our non-Christian friends along. When we invite our non-Christian friends to a barbecue, we invite our Christian friends along, and merge our universes so our non-Christian friends fall into a community of believers. And so Paul in 1 Thessalonians says, hey, do you remember how I lived among you? No, he doesn't say that. He says, do you remember how we lived among you? So the non-believing Thessalonians end up in a community of believers. It's also why Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says, hey, I saw Christ risen from the dead. Oh, hang on, not just me, but the other apostles saw Christ risen from the dead. Oh, hang on, 500 of your friends saw Christ risen from the dead. So Christ is risen from the dead, whether you like it or not. It's just true as a brute force fact, but it's way more believable if 500 friends also believe it. And in the book I share the story of how when I was a junior doctor, I lived in an apartment with 3 other junior doctors who were non-believers, but because they lived with me, they fell into a community of believers. So when my Christian friends came over, we invited my apartment friends along. When my apartment friends went somewhere, I invited my Christian friends along. And after 2 years, my non-believing friends started to come to my church. And after 2 years, they believed in Jesus because they had entered a community that also believed in Jesus.
Yeah, that's so encouraging, and it's such a great story in the book. And I also think that's a good illustration of the fact that evangelism can take time. That I think, again, I think part of it is the old paradigm where I think too often we think of it as one conversation or one meal, and that's going to be what closes the deal. And I'm sure that happens, and to the glory of God. But it's usually a marathon, not a sprint, on helping lead somebody to Christ.
That's right. And so because of that model, we think, oh my gosh, I need to know what to say. You know, we think evangelism is going to be this silver bullet, this drop the mic moment, boom, where, you know, our friends' walls of disbelief fall down and they enter Christendom. But I think it never was that way. So even in the Billy Graham moment, there was a lot of prior stuff that happened in that non-believer's life. They were on a church bus to start off with. So a lot of stuff had been going on in that person's life before they heard Billy, before Billy asked them to make that decision. And it's the same with our friends. They would journey into belief. And I love reading the biographies of adult converts. So people like Rosaria Butterfield and her story, C.S. Lewis and his story in Surprised by Joy, Francis Spufford, who was an atheist UK journalist, in his book Unapologetic. And these 3 books, they describe how they, as adults, journeyed from non-belief into belief. And you realize there was no one single moment that did it. You know, there was one moment at the end, but it really was a journey into belief. And so part of evangelism for us and as Christians is just saying, well, I want to be part of that journey in my friend's life. and realizing there's no one moment, but if I can be just one of many jigsaw puzzle pieces in my friend's life, but I don't need a silver bullet, drop the mic meme moment, where I win the argument.
Yeah, I'm always part of my approach to evangelism. I'm always influenced by the evangelism professor I had at Trinity, Randy Newman, who wrote out the alphabet on the board and talked about Z being coming to faith. And he's like, people are on all sorts of different spots on this. Somebody might be already really close because other people, other friends or relatives might have already done some groundwork and evangelizing them. And then you have other people who are totally far away from God. And you have people kind of everywhere in between. And he almost looked at it as kind of progressing somebody more and more forward, closer and closer to Christ.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and so when Billy Graham evangelized 20 or 30 years ago, people were way down that spectrum already. And I think Billy was just basically telling them, hey, come on, believe what you've heard 1,000 times before. Don't you think it's time? Come on, come now. And everyone said, yeah, you know what, you're right, it's time. I heard, so even more challenging for us now that we're post-Christendom, I heard Rico Tice, who's a very gifted UK evangelist, explain it this way. He said there are 3 moments in recent Western evangelism. The first moment was that Billy Graham moment where Billy's coming, preaching the gospel to people who've heard it before, and he's asking them to believe, come on, you've heard this 1,000 times before, it's time. So that was that time of evangelism. Then we went to a second moment of evangelism, and it's what we call the defeater belief phase of evangelism, where people know what Christians believe, but they can't believe it because of defeater beliefs, like I can't trust the Bible, what about other religions, what about the problem of science? So evangelism was, okay, let's remove those defeater beliefs, and let's explain them away, and then now you can believe the Christian belief. But now we're in a third moment of Western evangelism where the Christian and the non-believer, they're on different planets, they're in different universes. The non-believer doesn't know what we believe, they don't care what we believe, and deep down they're worried that what we believe is wrong, it's evil, it's harmful, it's oppressive. So now we're in a phase where we have to just, even show them why they ought to care. So Tim Keller in his book, Reason for God, was the defeater belief style of evangelism. But now Tim Keller has put out the book, Making Sense of God, which is showing people, well, how can we even get our friend to want to come to our universe, to explore what we believe? These are the challenges of being in post-Christendom.
One of the ideas that I loved in your book was, and on that subject, because perhaps it depends on the person as far as what it was that worked for us, that really communicated the gospel, that resonated with us, might be the story, the way of presenting it, that we're most apt to want to share with somebody else. But you give a lot of different examples from the Bible of different ways to communicate the gospel to people who might have different backgrounds or different areas of sin or struggle in their own lives, that I thought was extremely helpful.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and I'm learning this all the time myself, that people have different emotional entry points into the gospel. And this is something that missions theories, missiologists have explored for a long time. And so for some people, it could be the whole guilt forgiveness thing. I'm guilty, I've broken the 10 commandments, I need forgiveness. But for other people, it could be shame. I've shamed God, I've dishonored God. I too have shame. How can I honor God, and how can I be honored by God? And for other people, it could be I'm in fear. I need to be set free from my fear of evil spirits, of darkness, of whatever. And for some people, it could be the whole I'm unclean, I need to be clean, I'm trapped, I need to be set free. So there's so many powerful emotional entry points to Jesus, and we can explore them. And the Bible gives us so many, which is what I show in the book.
Yeah, again, I thought that was very refreshing. That there's different ways.
Oh, thank you.
Same ultimate gospel. That it doesn't always need to be a brimstone and fire type of presentation that you're giving to somebody. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's right. And the example is Jesus. Like, Jesus comes through the temple with a whip. So there is a time for fire and brimstone, right? But then to the man born blind, has a very different approach. To the woman at the well, very different approach. To Nicodemus, very different approach. So just beginning where they are, exploring their emotional entry points. So I think it's fascinating how to the man born blind, Jesus says, hey, I'm the light of the world. To the woman at the well who's looking for water, Jesus says, well, guess what? I am living water. But he doesn't do it the other way around. He doesn't go to the man born blind, hey, I can give you living water. And he doesn't go to the woman at the well, hey, I'm the light of the world. So he's free to begin where they are and explore different entry points to Jesus.
Yeah, that's one of the things I appreciate about the ministry of Jesus is that he doesn't treat people like we're robots. Like we can all just be programmed the exact same way. He obviously is all-knowing and he's God, but he responds to different people differently in different situations. And again, I think that was helpful in your book. One of the things that I'm sorry, were you gonna?
I was going to say, and you and I both studied at Trinity, so I got to study under Graham Cole, who's this Australian professor of theology, and he explained to me that Jesus is very gracious as well. He's very accommodating to where people are. So I think to the religious authorities who had the scriptures, who believed in God, who should have known better, he's quite confronting. Again, going through a temple with whips is very confronting. But to people who sort of didn't know better, who probably didn't have the scriptures, he's very accommodating of where they are. He's very gracious. So I like the woman who suffers from bleeding for 12 years, and he touches Jesus' cloak. Jesus doesn't go, how dare you touch my cloak? That's so superstitious of you. You know, my cloak is just a piece of material. It has no magical powers. What are you thinking? He said, you know, he begins where she is. You know, okay, you touched my cloak. You know, you got healed. So he begins where they are, very accommodating of their starting point, very gracious.
Yeah, again, I think that's very helpful and one of the helpful points that you make in your book. Returning to one of the ideas that you have at the beginning of your book about these different spheres of influence and introducing these, one of the takeaways for me from your book was that, you know, sometimes they make this a lot harder than it needs to be, as far as keeping things almost separate when it can be a very effective and successful strategy to merge these universes that we come from.
Yeah, so I'd say evangelism, I think, again, in the age of Christendom, we got taught styles of evangelism. And it's funny, we sort of only learnt two ways to evangelize, if you think about it. One was how to evangelize by giving a talk at an event. So if you're in ministry and you had to speak at an event, how can you talk like Billy Graham? What is your 20-minute Bible talk going to be? So we had that style. We had the other style, how to evangelize a stranger, like how to walk up to someone on a train or university campus, or how to knock on someone's door and read a tract at them. So how to evangelize a stranger, either at an event or walk up. But we missed this Goldilocks area in the middle. How do I talk to my friends and family about Jesus? So it's funny how none of us got trained in this way. So in the book, this is what I talk about, like how do we evangelize friends and family? Because we can't do a 20-minute monologue at them, and we can't walk up to them, read a tract at them, and then we're going to have to keep seeing these people for the rest of our lives, so we can't treat them like strangers. So I talk about how evangelism really is a lifestyle change, because often we think, what do I have to do? What do I have to say? No, it's who can I be and how can I live? And there are many tips in the book. So one was that, you know, merge our universes of friends. But the other one was hospitality. Just by providing hospitality and food, we give people the safe spaces, the permission to have vulnerable conversations about the spiritual, about the sacred, and also being that trusted unofficial de facto chaplain in their life, someone that they can come up to and trust for those deep and meaningful conversations. Because we all know how to have conversations about the weather, the weekend, and the sport. But who does our friend go to when they want to talk about something more than the weather, the weekend, and the sport? And evangelism is that lifestyle change where I can be that person that my friends and family can talk to at those moments.
Yeah, and again, that was another perspective I thought was really helpful, that we put so much pressure that we have to, that when it's the right time, sometimes we become that person, or that we're thrown into a situation where the person comes to us needing us to be that person. And the life can change in a phone call. Life is fragile and finite and fleeting, and that we never know when those moments are going to happen and those situations are going to come to, as you said, be the unofficial chaplain for somebody, a spiritual person in their life. And, I think I heard you say this in another interview, and I think it's true in my own life. I've never asked somebody if I could pray for them and had them say, "Oh, no."
Yeah, that's right. So, right, and I think it's even easier now. So during 2020, during the pandemic, studies show that there was this 20, 40, 60% increase in the lives of Westerners talking about God, spirituality, and trying out prayer. And so if we can be that trusted friend that prays for our friend, that's something that I really appreciate. So I say the way to be an unofficial de facto chaplain really is to take a genuine curiosity in our friend's life. So when we ask them what they did on the weekend, ask a follow-up question. I call it the power of the second question. Ask them, well, how did that really go? And, our friend might share with us, how they're really going at home, at work, in their family, at school. And at that moment, we can say something like, oh, you know what? My wife and I, we pray every night for our friends. Can we please pray for you tonight? And like you say, like 100% of the time, people say, you know what? That would be amazing. Please, could you? And so just by being that person who cares, who takes genuine curiosity, who understands, and who prays, then our friend will feel free to be vulnerable and bring up sacred conversations with us, and then gospel conversations will also happen.
Especially, you mentioned COVID, that this is a season that I think is really, it's a good time for harvest. That, I know you talk about this in the book, that there's this epidemic, even before COVID, there's this epidemic societally, loneliness, and that Christians have an opportunity to step into people's lives. And again, and I appreciate that you talk in the book about how it's a lifestyle. It's not usually just a one-off conversation, but really investing in people's lives. And that does take time, and it takes building relationships and investment, but something that we're called to do, and that is just a tremendous way to serve people.
Yeah, so it's amazing. God gives us so many good gifts to enjoy in and of themselves. So, and sometimes, so friendship. Let's talk about friendship. One of my friends joked with me that the greatest miracle that Jesus ever did wasn't rising from the dead. It was that he was a man in his 30s and yet he had 12 friends. And so it's so hard right now in the West to have friendship. As you mentioned earlier, I read everywhere, in The Guardian, in National Public Radio, in the New York Times, how there's a loneliness epidemic in the West right now. 60 to 80% of Westerners say they're lonely. It's a problem. And studies show it's more harmful than smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day, something like that. So we're in the middle of a loneliness epidemic. And so if we have friends, that's a good gift from a good God to enjoy in and of itself. And so what we can do is just be a blessing by being friends, being that trusted network of friends to our friends, both believers and non-believers. Studies show that we all need a tribe of 150 people. That's called Dunbar's number. We also need a circle of friends of about 30 people. And we need a trusted inner circle of about 5 people. People that you trust, to look after your kids in an emergency, or you're happy to ring them up to help you move house, that sort of thing. And my wife and I, right now we're in a stage of life where we have a lot of friends, a lot of non-believing friends, and we've noticed a lot of them have moved into Sydney in the last 5 or 10 years. So they didn't have a trusted network of friends. So my wife and I, we can simply just be Jesus, be loving, be caring by being their friends. And the blessing is they're our friends as well. So it's a good gift from God to enjoy in and of itself. And it's all, so if I only see it as a means of telling them about Jesus, now I'm using them. So that's wrong. That's over-functioning. But there'll be moments where God gives me opportunities to tell them about Jesus. So like you say, the loving thing at that moment would be to use that opportunity to tell them about Jesus. So it's like that parable of the talents, where one servant gets 10 talents, another one gets 5 talents, another one gets 1 talent. Sometimes I say when I'm with my friends, is this a 1 talent moment? Is this a 5 talent moment? Or is this a 10 talent moment? So is this a moment where I should only talk about the weekend, the weather and the sports and make nothing more of it? They asked me what I did on the weekend. I said, hey, we went to church. My kids loved it, but they didn't want to talk any more about it. Okay, that's a 1 talent moment. But a 5 talent moment could be where they say, what did you do on the weekend? I say, hey, I went to church. And I could say, well, do you have a faith? And they could say, yeah, I was raised in, this faith. And that's a 5 talent moment at that, do you know what I mean? So it's just enjoying friends just for what they are, not seeing them as a means to tell them about Jesus, because they will be using them, but also knowing that there'll be moments where God gives us 1 5 talent moments where we could talk about Jesus with them.
Again, I really appreciate that perspective. As we close, I just wanted to bring up some of the reasons people might give of why either they don't evangelize or struggle with evangelism, and just be curious to hear your responses to those. And a couple of these we've touched on a little bit, but just curious about your perspective. I've heard people say, I'm not smart enough to do it. I don't know enough about the Bible or theology to do it. You're a doctor. Josh is a pastor. You guys have training. I don't have that. I'm just not smart enough to evangelize.
Yeah, and I hear you, I understand, I empathize. And part of it is, again, seeing evangelism as I have to do a 20-minute monologue with a silver bullet answer, a drop the mic moment, or I have to talk to a stranger on a plane. Yeah, there's a time and place for that. But we're talking about how to talk to our friends and family about Jesus. And even the fully trained professional pastor might feel just as awkward as you do with friends and family. And I think that's where we realize, it's with friends and family, it's not a 20-minute monologue. It's not reading 4 spiritual laws to them. It's just about being Jesus in their life. And it's for such a moment like this that God has put us here. And Christianity was, and that we've always been meant to be salt and light. And God will use us through our personalities, our experiences, our stories. And that's why God gives us 66 different books in the Bible, because there's 66 different ways of talking about Jesus. And that's why God makes every Christian different, because there will be different ways of just you being you. And that's why God has placed you here just to be Jesus in the lives of your friends.
Reason number 2, I'm afraid people either won't like me or will think, and this is somewhat getting at the title of your book. I'm afraid people either won't like me or will think I'm some sort of crazy person or weirdo.
And again, I think that is so socially appropriate for our friends to think we are that weirdo. If we monologue at them for 20 minutes or we try to talk to them like they're a stranger on a plane, but if we just be their friend and be that trusted person that they can be vulnerable because they know they'll be heard, understood, and that trusted person that they can have spiritual conversations with. Because everyone, no matter how secular they are, they ask deeper questions about freedom, hope, meaning, dignity, purpose, even forgiveness. So people do want to talk about what's most deep and meaningful to them, but they just need the permission, the safe spaces to do that. And if we can be that trusted friend or family member in their life, these conversations will happen, and they'll happen very naturally, and they'll happen in a very meaningful and welcome way.
Reason number 3, I don't have many non-Christian friends.
And that may be appropriate. That may be stages of life. They do show how we go through these ups and downs and how many friends we have and quantity versus quality, that sort of thing. But then what I would say in my book is, God has put us here and he'll give us 1, 5, 10 talent opportunities to have friends. And right now there's a loneliness epidemic. Our non-Christian friends are just as lonely. They're probably sitting there saying, hey, I don't have any friends either. And so this is our chance now to start building a new network of friends. I lived in Chicago for 5 years. So when I first entered Chicago, I had no friends, but it's amazing. The friends build up if you look for friends. It's funny, in that last year in Chicago, my wife and I said, we can't make any more friends because we're going back to Australia. So it's funny, you stop making friends when we better stop making friends. But then when we came back to Australia, we had no friends. And it took us about 2 or 3 years to rebuild a new network of friends. And right now, it's 60 to 80% of the people around us are in that moment where they have no trusted network of friends. So I think God has put us here where we are so we can start building a new trusted network of friends. And in the book, I just give some simple tips on how that can even happen, simply by going to things that we get invited to, and they might start coming to things that we invite them to. Just simple tips like that.
It's too hard to evangelize because of COVID.
It is so the methods will have to change, but at the same time, people are crying out for it all the more. Like I said, studies are showing that during COVID, people were talking about God's spirituality and trying out prayer 20, 40, 60% more than they were before. I think people are Googling, exploring in the privacy of their own home, Jesus, the gospel, spirituality, way more. So it could be simply as sending a link to something that our friend might check out in the privacy of their own home. I reckon links, like URL, website, internet links, have a functioning like the Gideon's Bible. Now, you know the Gideon's Bible, you go to a hotel, you open the drawer, you think, oh, it's a Gideon's Bible. Who would read that, right? But people do at 2 a.m. In the privacy of their own home, I guess. And people will check things out in the privacy of their own home. So I think that the hunger for evangelism, for meaning, for Jesus, the gospel, is even more because of COVID. And we can be just creative and imaginative how we can be Jesus to our friends. Maybe through an online call, or just a phone call, say, hey, how are things going? Or here's a link to something you might find helpful.
That's great. Now, for somebody who might be listening or watching, or who's just finished your book, who's never really been serious about an evangelistic lifestyle, what would your encouragement be for them for their first step to take?
I think just have a coffee with a friend. It all begins with a coffee, and don't over invest into the coffee. Just invite a friend to coffee, talk about the weather, the weekend, and the sport. Nothing more. Just be a good listener. So we all think evangelism is, how do I tell someone about Jesus? But it actually begins with listening. And in the book, I talk about the 3 types of listening. One where you're listening, but you're not really listening. You're waiting for your turn to talk. One where you're listening, but you're waiting for your turn to tell them why they're wrong. So that's not listening. But the third where you're listening to hear, understand, and feel their emotion. And so if you just have a conversation with a friend where our job is just to understand them. Just begin with that. And I say evangelize the same way you would want to be evangelized. Like, it's the golden rule of evangelism. Do unto others as you want to be done to you. How would you want someone to evangelize you? Just begin with those little baby steps.
Again, I appreciate all those insights. Last question. This is not an evangelism question, but having lived in America for 5 years and now you're back in Australia, what's the one either restaurant or American food that you can't get in Australia that you miss most?
Oh, it's always comfort food. And I think for me, it's the Texas brisket. Like, it's the barbecue brisket from Texas. It's slowly coming to Australia, but you know, nothing can beat what they do in Texas, because I think the cows are different. And I've had butchers explain to me, yes, the cows are different. So the Texas barbecue brisket, it's the nirvana of foods, and it's the one thing I really, really miss.
Once again, Dr. Chan, thank you so much for taking time to join me. And just again, I really, really appreciated this book and was blessed by it. And so sincerely thankful to be able to talk to you today.
All right, well, call me Sam, and Josh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast. Thank you.